Okay. So John James Audubon sent this letter to a friend where he talked about this experiment where he'd kind of waved some meat in front of some turkey vultures, and they didn't really show any interest. And so he said, turkey vultures don't smell. They don't use their sense of smell to find food. We now know, researchers have found that turkey vultures actually have a very good sense of smell. And they use it to find decomposing carcasses and find food resources. And so turkey vultures will usually be the first to find a carcass in the forest. And then other vultures like the black vulture, which don't have as good a sense of smell, will follow the turkey vultures to get to that food resource. Another example of a bird using its sense of smell to find food is the snowy albatross. And a lot of pelagic birds, so birds that spend most of their time out just soaring over the ocean, will use their sense of smell to find fish, to find those food resources. And we actually, humans use this on pelagic boat tours, where you take a boat out to sea to see these birds that don't really come in close to land. So these pelagic tours will use chum, which is like really tasty bits of fish that they throw out into the water, and the smell of it attracts these birds closer to the boat so that people can get pictures and see these birds up close. And then another example of birds using their sense of smell to find food. So the kiwis, birds that are native to New Zealand, they're unique among birds in that they have their nostrils at the tip of their bill, which is most birds have it closer to their face at the base of their bill, but kiwi have it down at the tip. And this is because they use their sense of smell to kind of snuffle through the leaf litter to find food that, like the food resources that they need. And so if you're in the forest in New Zealand at night, you can hear them snuffling around, probably kind of like armadillos, just like snuffling around for food. So several birds use their sense of smell for finding food. Birds can also be smelly. They can have distinctive smells. So the Eurasian hoopoe, the nestlings will produce this kind of gross, sticky, smelly secretion that's thought to function in predator deterrence, so trying to keep predators away. And then some birds also produce specific smells during the breeding season, and it's thought to function in mate choice. So the crested auklet, researchers noticed that they have this kind of unique display during the breeding season where they stick their noses at the base of the neck of other individuals. And these colonies of crested auklets also smell like tangerines during the breeding season. And it's a secretion that these birds are producing just during the breeding season from this gland at the base of their neck. And so this is thought to function in courtship and mate choice. And so it's just a smelly thing that these birds do. So the crested auklets are kind of unique in that tangerine-scented secretion that they produce. But most birds do have distinctive smells. It may not be super obvious to humans, but it can be pretty obvious to the birds themselves. So most birds have very few glands. This is because birds, they need to be very light in order to fly. And so they've kind of reduced the number of glands that they have. But almost all birds have a preen gland. This is a very important gland because it secretes a waxy substance that so they get it on their bill by kind of pecking at it or wiping their bill on it. And then they spread this oily stuff over their feathers while they're preening. And this helps with waterproofing. It helps with getting rid of parasites. And there are also smelly components in this preen oil. So the waxy substrate kind of holds on to some some chemical compounds that are volatile, so they evaporate readily at normal temperatures, and this can produce an individual scent for birds. And so these scents are going to be super obvious to humans, but birds do pay attention to them. So the preen gland secretions from these two chickadee species, the black-capped chickadee, which is found kind of the northeastern United States, and then the Carolina chickadee, which is found around here. So these two species, they look very similar, they have distinctive vocalizations, and they also have distinctive smells. So when researchers analyzed the composition of their prenoil, they found that there were different volatile compounds in the prenoil of the two different species. And then when they took individuals of each of these species and presented them with just those prenoil samples, so they gave a black-capped chickadee a prenoil sample from another black-capped chickadee or from a Carolina chickadee, that black-capped chickadee spent more time with the prenoil sample from the black-capped chickadee. So it showed a preference for that odor cue, that smelly cue from its own species. So in addition to providing information about species, these odor cues in the prenoil can also provide more detailed information about the genetic makeup of a potential mate. So in song sparrows, the composition of these volatile smelly compounds in prenoil is related to genetic characteristics, especially the immune system makeup, genetic makeup of an individual. And both males and females pay attention to this odor information in ways that are relevant to mate choice. And so I've mostly been talking about odor cues so far. I do also want to add in the sense of taste, which is very much related to the sense of smell, because it's both the detection of chemical cues. And so I will talk a little bit throughout this talk about chemical communication, which kind of encompasses both of those, both like your sense of smell and also your sense of taste. And an example of birds using their sense of taste when they're looking for and choosing mates comes from the satin bowerbird. So these are birds found in Australia, and the males build these really elaborate stick bowers and then arrange blue objects around it. And the female will stand inside of that bower while the male does the dance part of his display. Researchers observed that the males add a saliva-based paint to the inside of the stick bower. So they're kind of spitting on the sticks on the inside of that bower. And then females will go inside and they'll taste it. So while they're standing in that bower, they'll kind of like lick the sticks. And so researchers were like, is this important? Are they tasting this? And so they experimentally removed some of the paint from the inside of the bower. And this reduced the likelihood that a female would copulate with the male or revisit that male. So it did seem to have some effect on the female mate choice decisions. And so I'm going to play this video of the display again of the 12-wired bird of paradise. And I want you to just think about how scent cues may be displayed. I'm sorry, I'm like blocking your view. So I see this display and I think the female's nose is right there, right next to the preen gland. And potentially even those wire feathers on the tail might be functioning kind of like scent diffusers or that we use for essential oils. And so I'm interested in how scent cues and chemical communication affect mate choice in these systems where they already have these really elaborate, complex courtship displays. But just I want to understand, like, do scent cues also play an important role in mate choice? So how do we test this? How do we know whether birds have a sense of smell and how important it is to their behavior? I'm going to talk about two approaches that I use. The first of which is you can add or remove odor cues to areas where birds spend a lot of their time. So this is like, for example, the satin bowerbird example, where researchers removed some of that paint from the inside of the bower. And then you can also present a bird with like old scent samples from an individual. So give them a choice. So that's what they did with the song sparrows to test whether they were paying attention to those odor cues of genetic characteristics. And so I use these two approaches to look at chemical communication in my favorite bird species, the lance-tailed manakin. So this is a bird found in Central and South America. And I'm going to let this video play for a little bit. So these birds are best known for this really elaborate courtship display where you have like a cooperative courtship display where you have these two individuals that are performing this display for a female. And you may think the female's choosing between those two birds that are displaying for her right there, but she's actually going around to a bunch of different sticks and choosing among just the dominant, so each partnership has a dominant alpha male, and so she's just choosing among the dominant males. And so if the female sticks around, if she likes what she sees, the subordinate beta male will leave, and then the dominant alpha male will continue the display, and it may end in copulation. So these birds have this really elaborate courtship display, but that's not what they're doing most of the time. The females spend most of their time searching for nest spots. The females do all of the work raising the offspring. They only visit the display perches to watch these displays and then make a decision about who to mate with. Males, on the other hand, spend all of their time at this dance perch. They spend all of their time. Enough so that my lab at FSU, my dissertation advisor, has been able to work with the Cornell Lab of Ornithology to have a webcam set up on a dance perch. It is still most of the time just a stick in the forest with nothing too exciting happening, but the males are there enough to make it worth watching every now and then. And so males spend a lot of their time doing this perch maintenance, where they're clearing vegetation. So if there's a leaf that they don't like where it is, they'll peck at it to try and get rid of it. And then they also do a lot and wiping their bill on the dance perch. And so I saw these behaviors, and I wondered if maybe they're adding their scent to the dance perch or kind of changing the scent composition on that dance perch, potentially adding some kind of taste cues because they are pecking at it. And then females, when they come to visit during the display, will wipe their bills on the perch as well. And so I wondered if this dance perch was a source of chemical cues that are important in the courtship display of lance-tailed manakins. And so that was one of the questions that I asked during my PhD. So is the display perch a source of chemical cues in lance-tailed manakins? And I took kind of two aims to address this question. So first, I wanted to ask whether males pay attention to chemical cues because they're spending all of their time at this dance perch. And then I asked whether females pay attention. Is it important to the mate choice decisions that these females are making? So we study these birds down in Panama, in Western Panama. We have a field site there. So I got to spend about a quarter of the year every year for 5 years during my PhD down in Panama. And our field site, these are some pictures from the field site. So my PhD advisor, Emily Duval, has been studying the same population of lance-tailed manakins since 1999. And so we have a really well-established field site there. It's on an island, so there are some nice ocean views, but we spend most of the time deep in the forest watching these birds do their thing. Because we've been going down to this same field site for so long, we have a pretty good idea of where the birds are going to be. So these males, they can live for up to 18 years, and they tend to stay in the same area for most of their lives and use the same stick as their dance perch year after year. So we can go down each year and we make sure the birds are where we expect them to be. And then if we want to do some kind of experiment, we can choose specific dance perches to do that experiment. So the first experiment I did was to try to remove some of those chemical compounds, some scent cues from the dance perch to see if the males and females notice. And so I did that by cleaning the dance perches with ethanol because I expected that that would remove some of the scent cues and just change the chemical environment on the dance perch. I also had a control condition, so something to account for me just going up to the dance perch. So I also cleaned the dance perches with just a dry cloth, which I didn't expect would change the chemical cues as much. And then we wanted to know how they responded to this. So we recorded their behavior with our really high-tech camera boxes, which is a camcorder in a Tupperware. And it works great. So we're able to set these cameras up and record continuously at the dance perch for 9.5 hours per day. So we had to do this at a bunch of different dance perches, and we did the manipulation for 15 days at each dance perch because we wanted to kind of measure their behavior over a long period of time. And so this experiment would not have been possible without an amazing field crew that helped me run the experiment. And then a really amazing crew of undergrads that helped me process almost 2,000 hours of video. And about 80% of the video is just a stick sitting there. So it was a very dedicated crew of undergrads that scanned through all of these videos so that we could find the really interesting parts. So we scanned through almost 2,000 hours of video, and we extracted just these bouts of activity. And we had kind of 4 main types of activity that we observed. So we had those displays for females, where males are performing the display and there's a female on the dance perch. The bouts of perch maintenance, where they're clearing vegetation, pecking at the dance perch, just maintaining it. The males also spend a lot of time practicing the courtship display. So there's no female there, but they're doing those display elements. And then sometimes they're just sitting there and not really doing anything else, just perching on the dance perch. And so we divided the behavior into these 4 categories because displays for females are probably going to be the most important for female mate choice because that's when the females are there. And the perch maintenance might also be important because that's when the males might be adding those scent cues or changing the chemical environment on the dance perch. And so we expected that that's where we'd see the biggest response to that experimental manipulation. And then the behavior that we recorded was the number of bill swipes that these males were doing, because that's our kind of hypothesized chemical communication behavior. So we expected that they'd change how many bill swipes they were doing in response to our experimental manipulation. And so we made some predictions. If this bill swiping is a chemical communication behavior, how do we expect the males to respond? So in general, in the control condition, which should be kind of similar to baseline, we'd expect more bill swiping during displays for females and bouts of perch maintenance, because that's when these scent cues might be most important to female mate choice, and so when the males should be paying attention to them most as well. And then we expected them to increase the number of bill swipes that they were doing after that ethanol treatment to try and like add those scent cues back or kind of get the dance perch smelling or tasting how they wanted it. And so I'm going to show this is the data, the results from the experiment. I do have the like complex statistics down at the bottom, just to like to keep that on these slides. But what we're going to focus on is the box plots and data in the figure. So on the bottom axis there, I have those 4 different types of activity. And then on the y-axis on the side, the number of bill swipes, so what we actually recorded in those videos. And so what you can see is that they did the fewest bill swipes on average during displays with no female present and perching bouts, which is what we expected. They did more bill swiping on average during displays for females and bouts of perch maintenance. And then they increased the number of bill swipes that they were doing after that ethanol treatment, just like we expected. And so this suggests that male bill swiping is a chemical communication behavior and that it may be important for female mate choice. So for this first aim, do males pay attention to chemical cues? Yes, it seems like they do notice when we make these changes to their dance perch and they respond in the way that we expected them to. But what about females? Do they care? So why do we expect females to pay attention to chemical cues when they're choosing a mate? So kind of the 2 examples I've talked about so far are species recognition, so making sure that you're mating with the right species. And then these chemical cues can also provide information about genetic characteristics, so making sure that you're mating with the most compatible mate for you. And so we were expecting that female lance-tailed manakins are paying attention to these chemical cues for genetic characteristics, because the females, their only interaction with the males is at the dance perch. They don't get, and these males don't provide any parental care. So they don't get any like direct benefits from the males, but they may be able to get benefits from good genes from those males. And so we think that they're paying attention to genetic characteristics of males. The main genetic characteristic that we look at is genetic diversity. So just overall, males that have greater genetic diversity have higher reproductive success. So females seem to be paying attention to genetic diversity. And so that's what this figure here is showing, is just that males with greater genetic diversity, their reproductive success is higher on average. And we also do have some information that makes us think that these olfactory cues are providing information about genetic diversity. So a previous study that looked at the chemical composition of prenoil in lance-tailed manakin found that the chemical composition is related to genetic diversity. So males that have higher genetic diversity smell different from males that have lower genetic diversity. And so this means that the prenoil could be, the smell of that prenoil could be a short-range cue of genetic characteristics. But do females actually pay attention, or can we see whether females are actually paying attention to that? So to test whether females pay attention to a specific odor cue of genetic diversity, we took a slightly different approach at first. So we did that Y maze, or these kind of binary choice trials, where we caught individual females, and then we presented them with a prenoil sample from a high genetic diversity male and a low genetic diversity male, to see if they showed any kind of preference for just that odor cue of male genetic diversity. And so we expected that when presented with these choices, females would spend more of their time with the high genetic diversity prenoil sample, because that's what we think they like. So to do this, we go out in the field, we can capture these birds and take prenoil samples. It's a very non-invasive process. It takes about a minute, but we can collect these prenoil samples. And because we've been studying these birds for so long, and they live for so long, we can go target specific individuals that we know their genetic characteristics. And so we targeted high genetic diversity and low genetic diversity males. And then we caught females and put them in this Y maze and presented them with those prenoil samples. And we recorded their behavior in that Y maze so we could get a sense of where they're spending their time during the trial. So do females pay attention to this odor cue of male genetic diversity? They did not. So there was no difference in the like average amount of time that females spent with the prenoil sample from the high genetic diversity versus the low genetic diversity male. So they didn't seem to pay attention in this particular context to this odor cue of genetic diversity. However, this Y maze is a very artificial context. This is not how they're making mate choice decisions in the wild. In the wild, they have all of these other sensory components that are important in their mate choice, and they're also not cooped up in this little cage. And so we next wanted to see if we could, if females paid attention to those changes that we made on the dance perch. So we went back to all of those videos that we had, and we looked just at those displays for females. All of the individuals in this population are individually marked, so we can identify a specific individual in a video, and we know if they show up in any of the other videos. And so we can test whether that experimental manipulation that we did, changing the chemical environment on the dance perch, whether that influences the probability of a female revisiting a male, so coming back and seeing that male again, or if on any given visit, whether that female decides to copulate with that male. And we expected that that experimental manipulation, so changing the chemical environment on the dance perch, would reduce the probability of a female revisiting a male or copulating with the male. So first, we asked whether that experimental treatment, the ethanol or versus the control, whether females were less likely to revisit the male after the ethanol treatment. And they were not. There was not a significant difference in the probability of a female revisiting a male based on the treatment. What about copulation? Did that experimental manipulation influence whether a female decided to copulate? There was also no significant difference. So females don't seem to notice or care that much when we manipulate the chemical environment on the dance perch. So what can we take away from this? So is the display perch, is the dance perch a source of chemical cues in lance-tailed manakins? It does seem like it is, at least for males. The males really noticed when we did that manipulation. However, it doesn't seem to influence female mate choice. Females don't seem to be paying attention to the prenatal cues of male genetic diversity, and they didn't really seem to notice, or it didn't affect their mate choices when we changed the chemical environment on the dance perch. So chemical communication in lance-tailed manakins may be kind of complex, and it seems like it's more important to male behavior. So males are perceiving chemical cues and they're changing their behavior in response to changes in the chemical environment, but it doesn't seem like this is communicating the genetic characteristics that we thought it was. And then females don't seem to pay attention to chemical cues, at least in the tests that we were able to run. More broadly, how I'm kind of interpreting these results is that avian chemical communication in mate choice context may be a little more context dependent. So in lance-tailed manakins, the males and females, they spend very little time together. It's just during these courtship displays. And in the species where both males and females do seem to pay a lot of attention to these prenatal odor cues, these are socially monogamous species where the males and females spend a lot more time together. And so it could be that these odor cues, that these chemical cues are perhaps more important when the males and females have a lot more time spent together. So to kind of summarize, so do birds smell? Yes, they smell, they produce smelly secretions, and they do smell each other, and they pay attention to take cues from their own species and other species. They also use their sense of smell for finding food, avoiding predators, and making decisions about who to mate with. In lance-tailed manakins, though, it doesn't seem to be that important to mate choice. Males pay attention to it, but females don't seem to pay attention to chemical or odor cues. And there's still a lot to learn about smelly birds. And so my future research will continue looking at olfactory and scent communication in birds, but it's fun to know a little bit more about smelly birds than we did before. And so with that, I just want to thank everyone that helped me conduct this research and all of my funding sources. And if you want to watch more lance-tailed manakin displays, the webcam will be up for just a few more weeks. The field season ends in early June, but the webcam's still up there and it will be up again next year. It usually runs from late February to early June. And it's most of the time a stick in the forest, but sometimes they do something. And I am happy to answer any questions. Yes. There, sorry. Yes, yeah.
How many males use the same dance perch?
So each dance perch will have an alpha male and a beta male. Usually just one beta male, sometimes a couple beta males. And then like up to 10 other males will visit, but they don't get to perform the display for a female. So it's a very highly social area. You'll get juvenile males, so males in their second and third year coming in and starting to practice the display. And then even adult males that aren't an alpha or a beta, they're just floaters, they kind of move around. They'll come in and practice the display. And so the dance perches are highly social until a female comes, and then everybody leaves except for the alpha and the beta.
So with the length of time that they live and the fact that they're on an island, that genetic diversity, some of it can't be very much.
Yeah, so yeah, these birds live on an island and they live for a very long time. Their genetic diversity is not very high. Yeah, so it's a pretty inbred population, and Yes, but they seem to be doing fine. They don't seem to have that many issues. We do think that we get some individuals disperse to the island from the mainland. It's not that far. It's about like a 2-minute boat ride. And they can occasionally get across to the island, but yeah, it's not that common that we get immigrant individuals into the population. Yes.
Curious why the male father does not need to.
Yeah, so why they're doing so why do the males do this perch maintenance if it's not, and why do they pay attention to chemical cues? We're not sure. It's also possible that the tests we did with the females weren't enough to detect how they pay attention to the chemical cues. It could be that like maybe they pay attention to it 1 year and that informs what they do the next year, because these females do visit the same males year after year. Or it could be that it's not genetic diversity, it's something else about the male that they're using odor cues. And yeah, they're like this, the males they're highly social. There's lots of different males coming to each display perch. And so it could be that the odor cues, the chemical cues are more important to the male-male communication than male-female communication. Oh. Yeah.
And are they in short supply?
So yeah, so are the display perches in short supply? They will dance on pretty much anything. In fact, so Emily Duval, my PhD advisor, she was watching a display, like a tree fell on the stick in the middle of the display. They moved over five feet and like started dancing on another stick. So they're both like not picky about dance perches, but then also very picky about dance perches. And they are like the conditions do need to be right for them to have a display area, because it does seem like the dance perches are kind of limited, that because we have these adult males that they could reproduce. They could potentially be an alpha male, but they're not. They're kind of moving around waiting for a spot to open up. Yeah. Well, yeah.
So, what do the non-alpha males get out of it? Do they eventually get to move up the hierarchy?
Yeah. So what do the subordinate males get out of it? So the subordinate males, it's kind of like they eventually get to move up, or they're more likely to move up. So beta males that serve as a beta are more likely to get that alpha status eventually than males that are never a beta male. Some males are able to strike out on their own and just say like, I'm an alpha, this is my stick. And they make it, but being a beta first means you're more likely to like get to be an alpha eventually. Yeah, so we take whenever we capture an individual, we take a very small blood sample. Birds are great because their red blood cells are nucleated, which means that they have a lot of DNA in a very small amount of blood. And so we bring the blood back here, we extract the DNA from the blood, and then we have these markers that we look for. So we just sequence small bits of their DNA, look for these specific markers, and then because they're diploid like humans, they have 2 copies of their DNA, of like each of their chromosomes. So at each of these markers, we can see if they have the same version of that marker or 2 different versions of the marker. And across all of those markers, the proportion where they have 2 different versions of the marker instead of 2 of the same. So the higher proportion of 2 different markers, the greater your genetic diversity than if you have.
And you have a database of all the numbers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yes.
Did you say that how you get on else?
Yeah, I didn't explain it. So how do we get the preen oil from the gland? We kind of mimic what the birds do themselves. So they, during preening, will wipe their bill and kind of peck at the preen gland. It's just like a little nub that sticks out above the base of their tail. And so we take a little microcapillary tube and just kind of like gently scrape it over the top of the gland, and that causes them to secrete some of that oil. And then we can collect it in the tube and use it for, yeah. Stephanie?
Okay, she actually asked my question.
Okay, yeah. Yes. Yeah, so both within and across years, the female, they show pretty high mate fidelity. So meaning that they come back to the same male. Within a season, they usually copulate like many days in a row. So they'll like come back to that same male day after day and copulate and then lay their eggs. And then across years, they will also usually, or like if that same male is still alive and still at his display area, females often go back to the same male and mate with that same male in the next year. But what's interesting is they don't like just go straight back to that male, even though he's in the same spot, still doing his displays. They'll still visit multiple different displays, but then still like choose that one male again. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So much, Rowan.
Thank you. Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
Thought about the significant potential role that green gland has.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
So we talked about it, blue-headed and he gives off like a perfume smell. And
Yeah.
it's been said to attract insects and everything.
Mhm.
But I also noticed when you go up to him, he's very interested in what you're doing. You get this wonderful perfume.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
yeah.
A blue-headed hyannis is a parrot. Oh, parrot. So South American.
Yeah, I don't know too much about parrots, but that's very interesting that he doesn't have a preen gland and makes yeah. Yeah.
That we are aboard Amazon. I guess it, typically Amazons do have a fragrance to them, and I mean, she smells like lilacs at times.
Yeah.
All the time. So I just, and I'm not sure where it's coming from, and
Yeah.
I'm intrigued by that.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think some birds do have some extra glands on at least the crested auklets and other birds. Yeah. But so I know people that like catch a lot of different bird species and have kind of a habit of smelling each bird because like it's not super obvious to humans, but each bird does kind of have a distinctive smell, some way better than others.
Well, thank you again.
Well, so with the chemical communication, we collected preen oil samples from several different manakin species. So there's a bunch of different manakins throughout Central and South America. And so we wanted to see if preen oil did have species-specific differences among the different species. And so far it does seem like it does. And there is one manakin species that we don't have a preen oil sample from, unfortunately, but where the courtship display involves the female pressing her face into the base of the neck of the male. And so potentially like there may be manakin species where chemical communication is more important than the lance-tailed manakin. Yeah. Thank you.